Bueno, la idea en cada mesa es que cada participante, en este caso arrancamos
The idea is for this table, where we're going to start with Tanya, Miquel and Najwa. Well, each of you will give a very short reflection on the title of the session, and then we will favor the dialogue. But we are waiting now for the third speaker of the session.
Always the poet.
Sí, o podéis empezar. Empieza Miquel, perfecto.
Vale, esperaremos a Najwan.
Okay, let's start for some minutes, Najwan.
Before anything else, I would like to say that it's a great honor for me to be here in these meetings with this wonderful name, Albert Camus, and here in Menorca in this full auditorium. This is great. Let me please tell you before I get started, as a journalist, when you are working in the office and you receive an email that you've been invited to such a wonderful place, you just don't have a look at your agenda, you just give them a yes. And then afterwards you see what you had written. For a journalist, Camus, especially for people my generation, when you were a kid at school and you had these reading programs, really ambitious, and you were reading universal authors. He was a master, specifically given his critic spirit. So today's debate topic, the title actually, is can be used for anything, because words kill and lie, of course, but it's great to reflect on it. This is a great opportunity, and we're going to do so. I believe that words do lie, do kill, they humiliate, pinpoint, modify the meaning or the purpose, and at the very end they can actually kill. We have seen recent examples, well analyzed, saying that some white supremacists in the US killings had been motivated because of a social network campaign. This has been studied. Of course, it only happens, unfortunately, in the US. It happens everywhere. But words, apart from lying, they can also be used to explain, tell stories, describe, fall in love, or convince someone to love you. And we have the words by Najwan, our poet, our friend. We will hope that he'll be coming home. His work talks about this. Or Tanya's images, for example, in these wonderful documentaries for the Wall Street Journal, for example. But she will tell us about it. And let's beware, because there are some words that seduce us, that flirt with us, to lie to us, to spread fake news. So it's the use of words being made with the wrong intention to attract followers, to afterwards criticize a political adversary, etc. All throughout history, we've seen plenty of words ending up in killings, or the greatest example of it, like genocide, and we have seen it several times. Cockroach, for example, was used to dehumanize Jewish people by the Nazis, or against the Tutsis in Rwanda. So same word with the same perverse will behind it. When they said old people, it was not referred to the elderly, but to pinpoint the victims of the Cultural Revolution in China. This is another example. Now, focusing as a journalist, where I've been working since I was 19, evidently we see the warning of Camus' sentence on the need that words persevere on with all good meanings, as we said yesterday during the opening, and today the Major has reminded us, we need to use the right words. We cannot say anything when we have no words when we see this terrorism against the civil society, these bombardments. Is not self-defense, it's just killing the civil society. So we have talked recently in La Vanguardia, and I would recommend to young journalists that they should read Stefan Zweig, specifically the previous days before the great world wars, because he's a great narrator of those previous moments. So before I came, I reread some chapters of The World Yesterday, his book, and this anecdote before the Sarajevo, the famous shooting that wrote a new page in history, the way we knew the world. He describes going to a cinema in a small French village where they are watching the film, and before it there's a series of documentaries on everyday life, people are laughing, and suddenly when the Wilhelm II, the Kaiser, everyone starts booing onto the screen, and he's in shock given that reaction, so spontaneous, and he analyzes the thing is the propaganda of hate. So we see that this is heavily anchored in the past. This is not new. So the propaganda of hate can modify and generate these words. We see this enthusiasm and how this criticism against the adversary and the energy of that mobilization when families were taking their kids to say goodbye when they were living to the front, the train station, and of course, 30 years afterwards, after the Second World War, obviously we see that this enthusiasm, at present moment, this is not happening, and basically this is due to several facts, but we've seen a series of words that have not lied, they have told the truth about the horror of war. New journals, Chronicles, or Jean Renoir with A Great Illusion, or Remarque, or Robert Graves' novels. We see these novels, these words actually explaining horror, and now we see governments in Ukraine or Russia totally incapable of using these words and recurring to forced mobilizations even under menace. So in today's journalism, this form of toxic process and using words in an intended manner is very, very old. But now in media, what we find is this phenomenon at a large scale, because since a few years, social networks, these information motorways have become the networks through which this misinformation is circulating at a large scale. So this makes us be aware and defensive so that we can determine what is true or not from this information we're being bombarded with. So what's the scope of this distorting power that AI, artificial intelligence, has in this context? These networks impact media, and I have selected, for example, of course, the world is a myriad of gray areas. I'm being pretty reductionist to three possible scenarios where media can react against this avalanche of fake news that sometimes media digest, and sometimes even they are the actual origin of this misinformation. Sometimes media can assume these lies and can amplify them because this is the message they want to portray to their spectators, audiences. It depends on the format, and this is legitimate, but that's not journalism. Journalism is something else, and in this case, in a very guilty manner, because what they're doing is legitimizing such lies, such liar words, taking advantage of the prestige that still has the written word or the GT, the news format. Program. And we've seen plenty of examples in these countries. So there's a way of acting in a non-responsible manner without having accepted the role that media play in our society right now. We would be talking about media who don't filter fake news, basically because they have not thought about it, or because journalists are not really properly trained to fully understand the role they should play and their responsibility when it comes to exercising their profession. So due to the disprestige of the journalistic profession, or lack of good conditions, work conditions, and public relationships, because sometimes this is motivated by the actual lack of resources of the sector. And the third hypothesis are media who have actually accepted who they are, their trajectory, the role they play in their society, being fully responsible in their context. 10 years ago, approximately, it was trendy in media to do a fact-checked or reality-checked column where we analyzed certain fake news. This actually still exists in certain formats, and this is where some specialized media ended up, as we have here in Neutral, for example, La Vanguardia, where I work. We launched these sections too, and I believe that where we're going and where we would like to keep going in large media companies is that we shall become filters. We will parse that information because lie is gaining power and spaces even more and more. So this will be accentuated with artificial intelligence devouring and spreading these fake news all about. I remember an anecdote. This has nothing to do with the old journalism. I'm thinking about this Spanish expert, Nuria Oliver, who amidst a debate suggested that maybe the future of journalism is going back to the paper, the hard copy version, because it cannot be hacked. Today, it's super easy to replicate a web page and fake it. So maybe this was an exaggeration. I believe that the paper edition will just be a minority format, unfortunately, but I believe that at least in La Vanguardia, something that is pretty successful. It's the e-paper format. It's a reproduction of paper in electronic version for iPads, which also reproduces the hierarchy of news, which is something that loads of readers need in this never-ending web page and of scrolling and clicking and going here and there. This hierarchy helps them keep reading. And it's a great thing right now. Again, talking about why we're here today, I believe that having this structured information offer where lies simply don't happen is the way forward.
Hello. Trying to get the visuals working.
My bag. No, my bag. No, my bag. The bag.
Good morning. Really an honor to be here among so many distinguished minds of so many various mediums. It's been an inspiring day and night of conversations. So I thank you for the invitation. I love the premise of this particular panel because that question of whether words kill and lie actually have driven my career. I began as a writer. I began as an ardent journalist. And I think there is no greater failure of journalism or, in fact, editorializing a location, a space, a conflict, as there is in occupied Palestine. And it was actually my bitter disappointment at not only the assignments that I would be given, but at how documentation, pure, simple, raw facts on the ground, words like occupied Palestinian territory would be editorialized and changed and when it was not in my hands. I had a bitter argument with the Wall Street Journal, with the New York Times 10 years ago, and they removed occupied and simply called the locations I was shooting the West Bank. And I asked, why are you creating a gray where one doesn't exist? These are facts on the ground. However, Palestine, there's even a term in the United States, PEP, Progressive Except for Palestine. It's accepted, primarily, we could argue, in the US media and part of European media. I believe Spain is a bit more fair in its representation, but sadly I don't speak Spanish. But it was a disappointment in words that drove me to images. And it was actually further a disappointment in traditional editorializing, even of photo essays, that drove me to expand. I should be thankful. It drove me in my anger at the misrepresentation of what was, even work that when you tenderly gather it and how it goes out into the world, that drove me to a more absurdist. So there is my personal work, which I will show you primarily today, a few images. And then there is the straight journalism, which feeds me, right? But in this period, in this particular war, I have worn a hat. 7 months I've been working for the Wall Street Journal. It was unexpected. I think the fact that they chose me to be the primary photographer on the ground, covering West Bank and Israel, was a brave choice. I wasn't the obvious person to do so. I had to cover the immediate aftermath of October 7th in Kibbutz Be'eri. I was there. I witnessed a bed, an IKEA bed, that looked exactly like my 12-year-old daughter's bed, covered in blood, with an open window, and a tree outside. It would have been the most idyllic place for what we would imagine for a child to sleep. I angered. I broke the hearts of some of my students, of some who really, there's a problem where we have also in the world, some of the failure of journalism have driven social media to play a stronger role. But there was also this misunderstanding. I had I would call it a privileged position to have documented, but I also was this particular war, because I've had a say in reminding, you're not covering the West Bank. The occupied West Bank is tied to the genocide in Gaza. I've been able to push and remind and push back. And when I am documenting events inside Israel, I am able to, I have seen with my eyes people going and shaking hands of generals who were speaking and saying, thank you for what you do. I have been flabbergasted by the role of Western media and how we have covered Israel. So it's a privilege, while editorially I'm not always comfortable with even how my captions are translated. I push back and I stand. I haven't worked with the New York Times since they took out the simple word occupied, which created a gray, which has allowed an expansion where your average Israeli citizen is increasingly believing that the West Bank is an extended suburb. It's surreal. Words matter. And journalism of all fields has failed Palestine. So in regards to I would say, the biggest failure in the coverage of the Israeli war on Gaza has been the fact that the Israelis have refused any access to Gaza to international journalists. And for me, The fact that every single event, we've covered every single Israeli army-sponsored event, 1 million stories on the pain of the hostages, but we accept. I believe that media should have taken a stronger stance and refused to cover certain things until they were given access to Gaza, on the one hand. I also think it's very problematic. The unexpected heroes of this war have been the Palestinian journalists inside Gaza. And what they have carried, I think this is unprecedented in history. The only people documenting the war are the people that are being bombed. No one else allowed. Journalists being targeted. Over 100 journalists have been killed, and there are many documented cases where they probably were targeted. Technology that we've never seen before. AI technology, drones making sounds of crying children to draw people out to shoot them. We're in a whole new ballgame right now. And what journalism is doing, we should be questioning, and we need to be more on our toes. So in fact, this is the only traditional image that I have in the slideshow. This was from the Washington Post. This elderly gentleman is entering his home in H2 of occupied Hebron. And this is his reality. And the screen is quite dark. You cannot see on the right upper side is what looks like a camera, but is actually something that can send out bullets. And every single day, this community enters their home. They're not allowed to have, if the wife is from a different part of Hebron, the wife's family cannot enter. But this is the thing about this image is it almost looks as if it's dystopian, as if it's surreal. But it's not. This is the thing. So I have found that my personal work, my personal documentary work, where I lean into the influences of people like Kafka, I find sometimes that reality more truthful than the standard editorial images. This diptych is from a recent assignment of The New Yorker. And what has happened, there is the brutality, the cruelty that we are seeing in Gaza, the genocide, 34,000 people killed, plus, 15,000 children. What is happening in the occupied West Bank, and while news scramble and do 80% coverage of the Israeli narrative and accept the fact that the Israeli government has refused access, and furthermore, it's not just refusing international journalism access, it's also, there is a phenomenon, I don't know if it's the same in Europe, but in the US, you will not hire a Palestinian on the ground in Gaza on an assignment because of the the duty of care. You don't want the responsibility. You're being ethical because you're protecting them, and you don't want to send them out on an assignment. But this further diminishes the voice. And this is why social media has risen up with people that were not journalists. They're influencers who told the truth, who have been narrating what happened in Gaza. In the West Bank, meanwhile, you had, so here we are, an inordinate amount of money and international journalists on the ground in Israel covering 80% of the Israeli story from Tel Aviv, the furthest point away from the story. And the West Bank, land grabs, unprecedented violence that is happening. This particular scene, there's the phenomenon of solo settlers that are emulating the pastoral practices of Palestinians, bringing sheep and using this as one of the most successful land grabs within the West Bank. And this particular man, this elderly gentleman here that you see on your left, he had been chased away from his home. And because there was a journalist, me and a writer there for The New Yorker, the old man wanted to run and see if they had desecrated his home. And the people were pleading. I heard young men with terror in their voices screaming, "Don't go, don't go." And the old man, empowered simply by two journalists who really could not protect him, that gave him the motivation to run to his house. The writer immediately went. I paused, because this house is so close to this, who was actually one of the 4 settlers that is put on the watch list by Biden, but we will see if it means anything, ultimately. To wrap up, I don't know how much more time I have. Sandra? So this elderly man ran and was emotional. There was a dog, an emaciated dog that looked so thrilled to see him, that was confused and left alone. And he looked inside, and this image you see on the right, a dead bird that was hung deliberately on the clothesline outside of his house. I find sometimes images as well. So I look at images as writing. As I said, I began as a writer, but I feel we have more freedom. We cannot be editorialized as easily. It can be a more subversive act, photography. And I find, again, this is a community, a Bedouin community inside Israel proper, in the Nakab. In English, I forgot what they call it. Anyway, this particular community has had their home. They're supposedly Israeli citizens. They've had their home demolished over 100 times in 5 years. So for me, when I came upon this particular scene, the child had been helping the elders rebuild a well, and he was tired. And for me, I was recreating you can't help but play with the literary tropes when you're there on the ground. I'm playing with the story of Hagar and Ishmael when they were sent out, banished, and had to find water to survive. This child is from a community in the Jordan Valley that has some of the most brutal uprising of settlements. Now, since October 7th, you have settlers wearing military clothes and coming in and beating, and there have been killing. And the Palestinians do not know, was this army, was this renegade? It almost doesn't matter because the system supports these settlers. But this particular child, I was interviewing her about the displacement. This was a few years ago. She has since been displaced. They've left their home. The most violent settler is a French settler named Didi. I cannot remember, they just whisper his name, Didi. And Didi came down in front of this child. She was recounting it. And Didi, as if he was going to shake the hand of her father. And he didn't feel empowered. He reached and took the hand of Didi. And without any indication, Didi pulled him and headbutted her father so violently that her father's head burst open and blood fell all upon the soil. She started trembling. I found myself changing the conversation, and we played. She played sort of a Sleeping Beauty game inside the earth that her father's tilling and the earth that he had to leave, in fact. Ahad Tamimi, I don't know how many of you know her, but she is a renowned activist since childhood. She didn't really have any other choice. And I photographed this shortly after she was released from prison. She was 17 years old. She missed her last year of high school. And when she was released, the New Yorker asked me to go photograph. But I found myself, so I think in journalism, and you take risk, if you want to take ethical stances, and there's diminished work for us increasingly, so it's harder and harder to do this. But I turned down, I went, and I just saw hordes and hordes of media and flashes, and I spoke to the mom, can I meet her later? She said she's tired, almost angrily. She said she's tired. And I knew I wouldn't, not only would I felt as if I was raping her, but I would not have gotten anything special in that moment. So luckily, a year later, I had a quiet assignment, and I sat with her, and I said, how would you like to be photographed? Where do you feel a sense of peace? And I came back the next morning, and we had a very quiet, she felt support from Spain. She will be, if things go according to plan, she wants to do a Master's of Law. I can't remember if it was Barcelona and Madrid, but one of the two locations. What to say to wrap up? I would like to speak about the importance of this award. Excuse my pronunciation, Incipient. What does Incipient mean? The name of the second, of the award that we're...
Okay. Something that's starting.
Something that's starting.
Yes.
So this particular award, we have two of the finalists that I believe are in the audience. I haven't seen them. Two Egyptian photographers from Alexandria who are, and the third, unfortunately, who's not here, from Libya. Fantastic photography. I haven't met her. She's here? Ma'oul? Okay. Mumtaz, I can't wait to see you or meet you. This particular award and these sort of awards are empowering those of us who have either been denied access to media entirely because we're local and there's somehow an idea that parachute journalists have a better truth to tell. Someone flying in has a better truth. There's that, and then there's also being editorialized to a way where what you've photographed or told is gone. So there is a movement, and in places like Egypt where it can be quite dangerous to do any sort of political commentary. Photography is playing a safer role for us. Overt words are easier to get us into trouble, but with images you can play more. And the work that is being done in Egypt right now is critical, but it is finding metaphoric ways to make their critique and still give an element of safety not only to the photographers, but to the people who are allowing them to narrate their story. And this award is, these sort of awards, such as Abdul Shannon, who won in the past, or Rihab, it is empowering the rise of a new generation of photographers who, at the failure, we have all failed. The traditional roles of media have failed, and I think that these awards are imperative, and I am very thankful for them. Just to mention this family, their father was killed. You can see the blood on the bottom of the ladder. He was one of the first Palestinians killed by the new settler uprising after October 7th. This was an assignment, I'm almost done, an assignment from Le Monde. These are French and American visitors who went to a settlement to learn how to shoot. Now, these are fake guns, but the whole scene was incredibly surreal. Then we have our resistance, if you will, in the West Bank. Your average, very few have their hands on these guns, but the ones that do, your average gun costs about $22,000. And when you meet these so-called militants, they're very young, and they're always, their guns are decorated with stickers of friends that were killed by the Israeli army. And it's these details where you can find more nuance to the story that unfortunately is often pushed out in our narration in Western media. These gents are part of Beta. It was a beautiful, brief moment of resistance in Palestine where they created the night of confusion. Settlers who had already taken land were coming closer, and the community knew what violence that could bring. A few years before, nearby, in the village of Douma, settlers came in the night and burned a house on the edge of the village and burned alive an infant, the mother and the father, and only, at the time, a 2-year-old lived. So they used lasers, the sort of silly lasers that you use in classrooms or at raves, and music, and they would, in the night, point to the settlers who had taken one of their olive groves, and they managed to push them back. But of course, that couldn't stand because the army could not allow that, and they came in, would not allow that, I should say, and many of the youth, it was this beautiful moment of hope, but many of the youth lost eyes and lives. I think I have gone over time, so I will end with, this is a pigeon from Susia, and I think I will, sorry, the final image. This was a Gazan youth on the edge of the sea in 2013, and those quiet moments of despair and cracking of the situation were evident even then, but where we are now is something entirely different, and I hope that we can consider and use this classic example of what is happening in Gaza and question ourselves as photographers, writers. And with that, I turn the floor to the amazing poet Najwan Darwish, one of my favorite poets of Palestine.
هاي القصيدة 2 pages identity card.
The whole thing?
Yes.
You want me to read it?
Yes, I would read when you. Everyone is listening.
You read in Arabic first,
Yes,
and then I read
yes,
it.
yes. Good morning. This is the earliest panel I ever participate in. Usually I sleep at day and wake up at night. No, the opposite. I sleep at day and wake up at night. Also, I have to say that speaking to you in a foreign language, almost like hugging from behind the curtains, or even kissing from behind the curtains. This is a metaphor they use it to describe translation of literature, translation of poetry. But also it is like this when it comes to a conversation in a foreign language, because English for me is not a foreign language. It's even, I don't feel it much. With other languages, I do feel them. English for me is like I have a Google Translate in my head. I speak in Arabic and the words come in English. So it's a kind of extensive feelings. The other thing, going back to the subject of the panel, words that lies and kills. For me, my life attempt was how to write the words that they do not lie and they do not kill. Killing, it doesn't always happening through weapons. Sometimes corrupt words do kill. In our world, the language of capitalism kills. Many ideological languages do kill. Corrupt media kills. Western media kills, for me. So I am also work in media. Some people do call me a journalist. I'm not sure how much I belong, but I'm there since 20 years. And I was living between these two, between poetry and between journalism. And I think my poetic writing was a kind of response to my to what I am facing in media. And some of my poems were supposed to be articles, and some of my articles supposed to be poems. And I probably was lost in this world. I never find my way properly. I will take advantage of this beautiful presence and to read poetry for you. I thought this would be something to do, to read a poem, and then I can say something else and we can finish. The poem I'm reading called Identity Card. And it is not a cultural poem. It is my real identity card. Identity card has many meanings. One of the meanings in Palestine that you have to keep your identity card with you all the time, because the Israelis, the occupation can stop you at any moment and asking for your identity. So, and you have to give him the blue identity, or we have many colors of identities, depend on your status in the hell, because the Israeli occupation hell is like Dante hell. You have the several floors of the hell. So this identity is my personal identity. It's not a cultural. It is who I am at the moment when I wrote it, something like 10, 12, 13 years ago. Nowadays, if I want to rewrite it again, it should be with index of the identity card. I'm going to read it in Arabic. There is a translation in Spanish. I think our friends in the translation. And my dear friend Tanya gonna read it in English. So because she is in my identity. She's part of my identity. She's a Jordanian, Cherkessian, and I wrote about her people which are part of my identity as well as Palestinian, as an Arab. رغم بطاقة هوية، رغم أن الكردية مشهور بقساوة الرأس كما يتندر الأصدقاء، إلا أنني كنت أرق من نسمة الصيف وأنا أحتضن إخوتي في 4 جهات الأرض، وكنت الأرمني الذي لم يصدق الدموع تحت أجفان ثلج التاريخ وهي تغطي المقتولين والقتلة. أكثير بعدما حصل أن أسقط مخطوطة شعري في الوحل، وفي جميع الأحوال كنت سوريا من بيت لحم أرفع مخطوطة أخي الأرمني، وتركيا من قونيا يدخل الآن من باب دمشق. وقبل قليل وصلت بيادر وادي السير، واستقبلني النسيم الذي وحده يعرف معنى أن يأتي المرء من جبال القفقاس مصحوبا بكرامته وعظام أهله. وحين وطئت تراب الجزائر لأول مرة لم أشك للحظة أني لست أمازيغيا. في كل مكان ذهبت إليه ظنوني عراقيا، وكان ظنهم في مكانه. وطالما حسبت نفسي مصريا عاش ومات مرارا بجانب النيل مع أسلافه الأفارقة. وقبل كل شيء كنت آراميا، ولا غرو أن أخوالي على الأقل من بيزنطة، وأنني كنت الصبي الحجازي الذي نال حلوى الدلال من صفرونيوس وعمر في فتح بيت المقدس. ليس من مكان قاوم غزاته إلا وكنت من أهله، وما من إنسان حر لا تجمعني به قرابة، وما من شجرة أو غيمة ليس لها أفضال عليه. كما أن ازدرائي للصهاينة لن يمنعني من القول إنني كنت يهوديا طرد من الأندلس، وما زلت أنسج المعنى من ضوء ذلك الغروب. في بيتي نافذة تطل على اليونان، وأيقونة تشير إلى روسيا، ورائحة طيب أبدي تهب من الحجاز، ومرآة ما إن أقف أمامها إلا وأراني أتدبر الربيع في حدائق شيراز وأصفهان وبخارى. وبأقل من هذا لا يكون المرء عربيا.
Identity card. Despite, as my friends joke, the Kurds being famous for their severity, I was gentler than a summer breeze. So I embraced my brothers in the four corners of the world, and I was the Armenian who did not believe the tears beneath the eyelids of history's snow that covers both the murdered and the murderers. Is it so much, after all that has happened, to drop my poetry in the mud? In every case, I was a Syrian from Bethlehem, raising the words of my Armenian brother, and a Turk from Konya entering the gate of Damascus. And a little while ago, I arrived in Bayadir Wadi Sir and was welcomed by the breeze that alone knew the meaning of a man coming from the Caucasus Mountains, his only companions, his dignity and the bones of his ancestors. And when my heart first tread on Algerian soil, I did not doubt for a moment that I was an Amazigh. Everywhere I went, they thought I was an Iraqi, and they were not wrong in this. And I often considered myself an Egyptian living and dying time and again by the Nile with my African forebears. But above anything, I was an Armenian. It is no wonder that my uncles were Byzantines and that I was a Hijazi child coddled by Umar and Sophronius when Jerusalem was opened. There is no place that resisted its invaders except that I am one of the people. There is no free man to whom I am not bound in kinship, and there is no single tree or cloud to which I am not indebted. And my scorn for Zionists will not prevent me from saying that I was a Jew expelled from Andalusia, and that I still weave meaning from the light of that setting sun. In my house there is a window that opens onto Greece, an icon that points to Russia, a sweet scent forever drifting from Hijaz, and a mirror. No sooner do I stand before it than I see myself immersed in springtime in the gardens of Shiraz, Isfahan, and Bukhara. And above anything less than this, one is not an Arab.
So, Arabic, English, طيب. The other thing I want to say, as you all know, we are now, now we are in the 7th month of a TV genocide. In history, we were reading about genocides. We saw photos after some time. But now, the genocide can be featured on the TV and on smartphones 24 hours for 6, 7, probably 8. We never know when it's gonna stop. And the world is watching. I don't know nowadays what kind of media we have, what the media did to people around the world that make them such feelless. I think media has the effect now, the kind of media we are receiving in the world has the effect of pornography, the pornography of blood. With time, people would lose their feelings. They don't feel anymore anything. When we write, when a person writes from my position, like, we have a challenge. The challenge is how you can even write in such a reality. How you can even write a literature, how you even can speak. You are pushed in the corner of the victim. You need to be a victim. And victims, usually, they are not eloquent enough because of the situation to tell their narrative. And this narrative also rarely would reach if there is a narrative. And if it would reach, it would be misrepresented. Some people would say that we lost, that we Palestinians, yesterday I was having a conversation with a dear friend of the Palestinian people who was saying to me that if you keep this way, you would keep losing. This way is the resistance. And I think resistance is essential for human dignity. And life is not just about physical survival. It's about human dignity. So I wouldn't deny that we are not in the best position when it comes to the world, to the kind of world we are living in. We are living in the worst ever world that happened. I read part of the history of the Middle Ages, and I think the world now is worse than the Middle Ages. I think the world leaders nowadays are worse than any leaders in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, there was from time to time some wise people appearing in the Middle Ages among leaders. Nowadays, look at the so-called international leaders, what kind of level they have, their ethical level or their knowledge or their sense of the world. So because of this, I would like to read a poem called Nothing More to Lose as an end of this session. دعي رأسك على صدري واسمعي طبقات الخرائب وراء المدرسة الصلاحية. اسمعي البيوت المبقورة في لفتة، اسمعي المعصرة المهدومة ودرس القراءة في الطابق الأرضي من المسجد. اسمعي أضواء الشرفات تطفأ لآخر مرة في أعالي وادي الصليب. اسمعي الحشود تجر أقدامها، اسمعيها وهي ترجع. اسمعي الأجساد ترمى وتتنفس في قاع طبرية. اسمعي كأنك سمكة في بركة يحرسها ملاك. اسمعي سير الفلاحين مهدبة مثل الكوفيات في القصائد. شكوى المغنيات حين يهرمن ولا تهرم أصواتهن. اسمعي خطى النصراويات يقطعن المرج، واسمعي الجمال لا يكف عن تعذيبي. اسمعي اسمعي ودعينا نتذكر سوية ثم ننسى كل ما سمعت. دعي رأسك على صدري، أسمع التراب، أسمع العشب يشق التراب. ضيعنا في الحب رأسينا ولم يعد لدينا ما نضيعه. شكرا.
Sí, ahora sí. I'm still not. Hola, hola, ¿sí? ¿Sí? Ahora sí. Sobre tu reflexión, ¿no?
Regarding your reflection on today's world's leaders, on the media,
Yo tengo una
I would like to share with you, I have a sensation it's hard to dissociate politicians from our societies, right? Political leaders are part of our societies and they are persons who've stepped forward in democratic societies to be leading those countries. And I believe that somehow there's a certain merit with respect to previous leaders because they are being exposed 24/7. Their personal lives are being controlled regarding what taxes they pay and what they do, administrative procedures to avoid corruption. You know, their freedom is limited. But I see a common aspect when we compare to the wars, as you've done, and I believe that you are right in that sense, and it's the lack of cultural education or formation training. I've been a journalist for a few years, and I see that in general, their cultural level of politicians is pretty low. And with regards to the debate, the way we use words, the meaning of words, this is important. Recently, I wrote a book of Albert Lladó, a journalist who worked with me in La Vanguardia, who writes about fake news, and he talks about the possibility of using irony as journalists to keep distance with regards to things. And I fear that currently, and I can see it as an author, the irony is not understood. If I publish something on a website with irony, there are readers who don't understand it because they read it in a rush. And it's tricky because you end up saying or transmitting the message that you didn't want because it's not being understood. So, given the fact that there are words that generate doubt, resistance, identity, genocide, there's also the lack of true knowledge of history from the side of politicians, journalists, who at the end of the day are part of society. So I believe that this criticism should be spread to everyone. And I'm worried because when we talk about the conversation on the pact of these universal readers like Camus, that it's being lost in the school curricula. People are reading less and less in general as a society. We must admit it. And I believe that sometimes words lose their meaning.
I think, if I understood everything correctly from the translation, we're at a quandary. Because on the one hand, there's less of an attention and time to give to the news, to read. There's a desire to interact with your news with a tangible element, not like the newspapers where you could sit and smell and open, but to touch, to scroll. There's this, so on the one hand, you need to compartmentalize and give bite-sized information, but on the other hand, the failure, yes, there's a lack of understanding of historical context. Why? Because quite often it is pushed out. The word count, less, succinct, etc. But sometimes essential information giving historical context is outright removed. The New Yorker piece that I did, the writer will never probably be hired again by the newspaper by the magazine, because it was reduced to a point that he thought it was ridiculous, and they took out an explanation of what is the Nakba, what is the loss of Palestine in 1948. It didn't take so much real estate. It was 4 or 5 words. He kept taking it out. And he said, if you take this out one more time, I will remove my name from the piece. So it ran. But of course, at what loss? He will not be eligible to be hired again. And the last comment, in terms of irony versus irony, I think is a defense, certainly in the context of Palestinian storytelling, or the greater Middle East, is the truth is often just diminished, denied, not given space. The infamous, starting in Gaza, the child that was killed, one of the images that, interestingly, it was images that kicked off, to some degree, the Second Intifada. The child, Faris, شو اسمه? The one that was killed behind his father in Gaza. I'm forgetting his name.
Mohamed Durra.
Mohamed Durra, thank you. Mohamed Durra. Those images, French photographer caught them, I believe. The world, they shocked the world. How many images? I often say, what has photography done? Great photography, telling the raw, immediate truth. There's no shortage of that coming out of Palestine historically as well. But the Israeli response was they coined the term Pallywood. So I asked Nadira Kevorkian, an academic who's recently been jailed. She's a Palestinian who teaches at Hebrew University. She's been jailed for speaking of genocide. I asked her, what can we do? I said, I was so frustrated, we're failing. Here's this mediation, and we're sending our words, and we're sending our images, and we're sending, and it's not hitting. I don't know what more you can do. And the new images out of Gaza, it's on another level. I asked her this before that. What can we do? How can we do better? And she said, let the voice of the wound speak. That was her only advice, and I don't know. I try, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think what kills more is silence. In history, there was moments of silence which still killing us till today. Because when there is a genocide, a war crime, a dictatorship receive silence, it is not just silence for this occasion or for this dictator or for this tyrant or this colonial regime. It would continue in the future. We are now in Palestine. What my personal feeling that we are paying the price of many silences in history. And I think the genocide wouldn't stop in Palestine. It would continue in many other places. And to be honest, no one is safe. People do not have, in general, humans, the difference between humans and other animals, our brothers and sisters, the other animals, I consider them also our brothers. The humans do have imagination. This is the most different between the human and the other animal. When the butcher kills an animal, they would take the animal among its sisters and brothers and cut the head. Other animals would think that they are safe until the butcher comes again with the knife to kill another animal. Humans became like this. They would think that, okay, the genocide is happening somewhere else. It's not here, it's not at home, it's not in Europe, it's not... And they are like thinking that they are safe. No one is safe. Genocide would multiply, and it would continue if it wouldn't have a real stand to stop it. Of course, I don't wish that. I don't wish what we see in Palestine now to happen anywhere in the world. I don't wish it even for my enemies. Who's my enemies? Colonizers are my enemies. And I'm against all regimes which harm the human dignity and harm the social justice. I should be a socialist. Unfortunately, there is no socialism strong nowadays, but this is what I feel. I feel that social justice is, beside the human dignity, are the basis of everything. Anyway.
Miquel, may I ask you?
Yo creo...
Thank you.
May I ask you, Spain has such a complicated history, a pained history, a most recent dictatorship. Many of your wounds here, I believe there are still literal bodies buried, not exhumed, stories that there hasn't been a proper reconciliation. Does your own history in Spain and your role as both novelist and as a journalist, do you feel that by some of these bodies literally not having been exhumed, does it keep it quiet?
Sorry,
or
can you repeat the question, please?
Your history, your complicated history in Spain, your pained history, a recent dictatorship, it's not so long ago that you lost Franco. From my understanding, there are still literal bodies buried that have not been exhumed.
Yes.
That's eerie to me, but I question, is leaving those bodies buried, in a sense, has it allowed a healing, a sense of calm, normalcy, or what does it mean as a novelist and as a writer? And here we are talking about our genocide, that absolutely it's all connected, and we're seeing what's happening in the United States right now and in France with these protests. It's all connected.
But why just Franco?
I'm just wondering for
when
him.
you speak about Spain, we have first mentioned the Andalusian genocide, which is still unacknowledged by the Spanish state. Till now, hundreds of thousands of Arab Andalusians or Muslim Andalusians or different Spanish citizens who were genocides, and it's not acknowledged. So this is more important. And who acknowledge genocides? Who do that? The Americans do acknowledge the genocide of the nations?
The Americans.
Or the French in Algeria, the Algerian genocide? Who's acknowledging the genocide? We are sitting in this Hippocratic world who's talking about the United Nations and human rights and blah, 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 blah. Habibti.
But
do writers acknowledge genocide?
What?
Writers?
Very few minority. How many Marlon Brando do we have? How many Juan Gartisolo do we have? Writers are small people. They are like bureaucrats. They want to survive. They want to die, actually, not to survive, because I think the physical survival and the good life survival is the death for the writer and even for the humans.
No, a ver, yo pienso sobre tu pregunta.
Regarding your question, yes, I will broaden. Regarding your question, I will admit that yes, there is a debate. I believe that I'm on the side of those who believe that those corpses should be exhumed and be given a dignified ceremony. But regarding what Najwan mentioned, I agree. I am pessimistic, but due to other reasons. Right now, we have no international media covering the bombings in Gaza because we can't access, we have no permit to do so. And we are aware of that reality thanks to the heroic task of the Palestine journalists. There are more than 100 Palestinians having been killed who have been courageous enough to share these narratives. But I am pessimistic because even if the access were to be allowed, freelancers, international freelancers sent by international media to Gaza, they wouldn't stay long. Because if in this rush world, a catastrophe, a war, or any event covers the next, and international journalists, and you know it well, travel according to the informative peak or the highlight of information, which not always is synonym to the severity, the important. We talk about silenced wars, right? Years ago, I remember working in the office in the newspaper. I was working on which will be the cover photograph. And the major important press photographers, I didn't know them back then because there were many. Now, however, we do know them because you are very few, only a few who are being paid by us to receive information. But maybe it will come the day where we will have no witness of killings and genocides and basic killings, all sorts of crimes. And this was a debate that we held at the beginning of the Ukrainian war. I remember it was Bucha in the north of Kiev. During that massacre, some corpses were found on the streets, and during a debate where I participated, we said that there will come the day where the Wall Street Journal, Le Monde, or La Vanguardia will have no journalists to explain such stories. because we will not have journalists covering or taking that humongous risk because they've been kidnapped, they've been killed, etc., etc. So in this sense, I believe that the capacity of international media to actually be there, identify the crude reality before a genocide or an ongoing genocide will be less and less, unfortunately.
It's happening in Gaza right now. And in the Ukraine, there has been a reinforcement of international journalists that go in side by side with the local writers and photographers. Of course, there's a fatigue and a hypocritical stance with the American government and the money that they're giving to the Ukraine right now. But there was also empathy on Europe's doorstep. They looked like us. There was definitely a double standard. But in Gaza, where, again, I believe this is unprecedented, where international journalism has all but been forbidden, the local photographers are exhausted. They need the reinforcement and perhaps the element of protection that would be given by the presence of international journalists to come in and reinforce. On the other hand, if the international journalists had come in, perhaps there would have been less of an emphasis of space given to the Gazan journalists. But the Gazan journalists are, doing journalism while their children are being killed, while they're moving houses. Sorry, you were going to say.
No, I wanted to say that if tomorrow,
yes.
If we say if the Israeli government allowed international journalists to go tomorrow to cover the crisis, the war in Gaza, of course, all the people who are now making pictures, taking pictures, international journalists in Ukraine would go to Gaza.
Yes.
And there would be a blank in Ukraine.
No.
And then some weeks later, all these journalists would flock to another war everywhere, because there are just a few of them remaining.
I disagree, and I think my colleague who will be on the stage later, very respected, brilliant mind, editor, among other things, Monica Olinde, was discussing this. There is a move, I believe, for the greater good of simply finances. Newspapers not affording to send. Yes, there are less of these,
that's the point.
But there is a move towards empowering the local voices as well as those regional voices. So there won't be, and there's no shortage of journalists hungry to
of course
cut their. So you will not. You will see those that are better suited to tell the story. And I don't think you will suddenly see a lack of journalists telling the story. I don't believe that there will ever be the same financial resources given to tell the story.
I meant a lack of journalists paid by the international media who has a strong influence in their countries. That's the point.
I don't know. I think there's going to be, it's the editorial interest. And if Ukraine is of the highest concern, you'll still see it. Gaza will never be given the same degree of resources that the Ukrainian story was. It simply won't. And what happens when I'm working on a piece right now with Time Magazine when the last photographer leaves, because the photographers have been pushed to their end and they are desperate to leave. They can't note, it's not humanly possible what they have endured, and they are waiting. The ones that haven't already left are simply waiting because it takes $5,000. There's an exploitative mechanism in Egypt where $5,000 per head, per human head, average family size of 10. So you're looking at $30,000+, but the photographers are leaving. And in that space, what happens? I'm speculating when the last photographer leaves, but that's the role of, again, the failure of media and us supporting editorially and otherwise. That's why where's my phone? That's why the influencer in Gaza has taken such an important role. But to your question, cynically and practically, I don't believe what is happening in Sudan, for example?
Or Yemen.
Or Yemen.
Yemen.
Yeah, there will be more resources, but it will never be all the resources taken. It's always, at the end of the day, on the editorial agenda of what they want to push and allow. No?
Wallahi, you both take media seriously. I am not. I do not take it seriously. I don't take media seriously. I don't take United Nations seriously. I don't take all of these decorations of our modern world seriously. These are nice decorations. They're not so bad, but we can't really depend on them. I depend more on the conscience of people and people finding ways, new bodies to express their humanity and to express their solidarity with each other. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a los tres, muchas gracias.